Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and ever since the most recent Warcraft Direct that revealed so much more information regarding the future of the War Within expansion, but also the next following chapter of the World Soul Saga, the next upcoming expansion of Midnight, which for now will still remain in the shadows up until year 2025. However, we do know that a good portion of Blizz development team has been working on Midnight long before the War Within expansion even launched. We know that we'll be able to unite the Elven Kingdoms and restore Quel'Thalas to its full glory, while also being able to add Quel'Thalas as part of the world map, which technically it's actually separate from, but it could also mean, based on some of the data mining, suggesting that maybe a big world revamp is arriving with this expansion launch. And while this may be a big void versus the light type of an expansion, the experience itself could be so much more based on the information we have available to us at the current moment. And I really wanted to dive into everything we know so far regarding the next expansion of World of Warcraft, Midnight, at least until we get more detailed information later in the next year. As always, if you guys want to see more deep dives like these about the War Within expansion or even future other expansion content, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. You know, ever since the Warcraft Direct, that trailer still lives in the back of my mind. The fact that housing is coming to World of Warcraft is kind of unreal. It's a feature that players have been requesting for forever now, but with them constantly rejecting it again and again, I don't think anybody expected for them to actually unveil it here, and the fact that they did is just still pretty unbelievable. Literally the biggest feature of any expansion, and the thing is not even released, and it's got so many players hyped up and in a frenzy to get their hands on this system as soon as humanly possible. One of the things they did when they talked about the actual housing system with some of the subsequent interviews after the initial trailer release, they talked about the customization options and some of the plans for the system. From everything we know so far about housing, we know they're not going to be like Garrisons 2.0, where Garrisons were a system of power progression as you get to establish your outpost out in Draenor and send out champions out onto missions that brought in various currencies and even gear and items and things that you could utilize to have your character grow in power. The player housing is meant to be a separate system from that entirely, kind of similar to being able to own a plot of land, but a lot more customizable, but without any kind of mission tables or power progression. And it's assumed that no auction house will be present in your house like you could have with the garrison, and hopefully features like trading posts, because that is essentially what a lot in the community actually want to see. While those conveniences would be nice to have in your own personal home, those also would erode the social structures of the game like they did back with Garrisons. So they would have to have a very surgical approach to it, what things should be part of the house and what shouldn't be, because the community's expectation is you should be able to go to your house, but you should still be encouraged to go out into those public player hub spaces, because that's how the game feels really alive. Being able to retreat back to your home after a long day of raiding or dungeons or PvP should be awesome and should be a place for you to hang out with all your friends, but you should still want to go to a main player hub for all the other regular in-game activities. Those are aware that players are very hungry for a ton of different customization options, and they did mention that while they did show off a Stormwind version of a house, there will be other variations besides the Stormwind. As for where those locations may end up being, or if it's going to be thematic locations based on, let's say, the places you're staying in, like a Ironforge house located in Ironforge, Stormwind house located in Stormwind, or will you be able to pick a plot of land somewhere out in the middle of Nagrand and then build yourself a nice little elven hut? A lot more of that information will likely come out by the time they're talking about the player housing system later in 2025, probably around the summer, with the proper reveal of the Midnight expansion. But they at least are aware the players are very hungry for a lot of different customizations, and it will be a tall order, and there's a lot of expectations behind what a proper housing system should have. Now, another major feature that we are aware of from the expansion of Midnight is the zone of Quel'Thalas. The entirety of the zone right now is its own secluded instance away from the rest of the open world content. And it's actually physically, it's impossible to actually cross into Silvermoon without having to go through a zone instance. All of these zones south of that, you could just fly from one zone to the next and they're all interconnected, but to enter Ghostlands, you actually have to use a very specific instance area to enter a part of the zone that you can't even fly around on. It's fair to say that all of it is pretty outdated, but it's going to go through a couple of different changes, like skywriting will finally be enabled and zones are going to be interconnected, and I wouldn't be surprised if the entire zones themselves potentially got larger or had a variety of different topography changes and the textures and the quality of some of the buildings and such. I'm assuming all of those things are going to be adjusted by quite a decent bit. However, while we know that the zone of Quel'Thalas will be revamped completely, it does help set up for a potential Azeroth 2.0 revamp as part of this expansion's feature as well. Like, for example, in the War Within expansion, we're delving deep underground into Ashkahet and Hollowfall, and then later down in places like Undermine, and probably deeper into the Rootlands at some point in the future. But for the expansion of Midnight, we're going back to Quel'Thalas. We're going back to the zones of Azeroth, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting a lot of new zones, rather than a revamp or an update, or rather a refresher, of some of the existing places we already know of. However, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to stop there specifically and just revamp Quel'Thalas and that's it. In fact, this could potentially set up a possible Azeroth 2.0 revamp, very similar to Cataclysm, but instead of destroying everything, they could possibly remake the world for the future. Based on a lot of the data mined files and items that we found over the last few years, patches, and even expansions, there seems to be a lot of different items there that suggest that the world is going to be going through some kind of a big revamp. Many of these items have been in those files for ages now, not ever really getting used, whether it is specific buildings or specific doodads like chairs, tables. All of those things have been sitting in the game files, but they've never actually got implemented anywhere whatsoever. And that big pile of data mine stuff keeps piling up into a fairly sizable chunk of different assets that are getting prepped and ready for something big. What's interesting here is a lot of these features are some of the housing features that could potentially be part of the housing update, as well as some of the little decorative pieces that also could be inside of homes as well. But then there's faction specific items there as well, a good portion of them too, and not necessarily Alliance faction or Horde faction, but rather the sub factions inside of the big two. Like a bunch of dwarven buildings, from a dwarven siege engine to dwarven guard armor, and a bunch of dwarven homes, not only dwarves but also night elves, as well as Forsaken, as well as humans, as well as Silvermoon and the Blood Elves. There's a lot of these little things that have been added and piled up over time that have never really properly been added into the game. So this leads me to believe, and many others to believe, that there will likely be some sort of a smaller world revamp on top of the Quel'Thalas update as well. And it would be kind of perfectly fitting with the housing update as well, which we'll talk about in just a bit here. But it seems that a lot of these factions, all these different forces that have been band together as part of the Alliance or part of the Horde, and on top of it, it even seems like there's even enough lore set up in game to suggest that this is likely going to be happening in the near future. A lot of which could actually be experienced through either heritage quest lines or big story quests that were made available during some of the smaller 0.5 and 0.7 updates of the last few expansions, like the Gilneans Retaken of Gilneas, where they get to take back their home and potentially now have the opportunity to rebuild their people and their city back to its former glory. The Undead Heritage Quest also gives them an opportunity to help rebuild Lordaeron and the Undercity as they finally get to stake their claim in the zone that was initially theirs all along and really solidify that they are here to stay. Even the Draenei Heritage Quest does lead them to potentially creating a brand new city for the Draenei, because up until then they've had Exeter, a crash ship that's just been serving as kind of like a home base for them, but they've never had a proper city to create out in Azeroth. Even the Maghar orcs, based on the recent short stories, are actually making a home out in Arathi, as they're given the opportunity to potentially grow after they've long abandoned Draenor. The Night Elves only recently with the Dragonflight expansion got access to a brand new world tree, but even some of the other allied races that we met and got to befriend and have them join our factions as well, like the Suramar Nightborn, for example, who have been rebuilding their city after it was initially taken over by the Burning Legion. And after so many years, you would imagine that all of these factions, as they're all looking to have a rebuilding type of story, all of them are eventually looking to bring themselves back to the full glory. And that's specifically what I wanted to note here. All of these little sub-factions between Alliance and Horde right now, or at least for the last couple of patches, have all been focused on rebuilding back and or to potentially making a new home. And this type of faction lore that have been able to establish over the last few patches can easily be tied into the player housing system that's coming out in the expansion of Midnight. Like I said before, Blizzard loves their tie-in stories and adding in-game events in order to explain why certain things are the way that they are. One of the best examples is the Warlock questline, which is a fantastic example. When you do the Warlock questline, if you haven't done it before, you should be able to start it in Stormwind or Orgrimmar in order to actually begin the questline, but it initially establishes how other races that weren't previously able to be Warlocks, such as Tauren or even Pandaren or even the Lightforged Junai, why they would want to walk the path of a warlock and what could potentially lead them on the path of learning the destruction, the affliction, and the ability to summon demons with demonology. And it's an awesome little storyline that does help flesh out some of the lore in WoW and gives you a reason as to why some of these race class combos are now possibly available. And they actually done similar thing with the Drakthir as well. The Drakthir got access to more than just evokers kind of recently with warriors, rogues, priests, mages, but not other classes like paladins or shamans or monks, even though technically monks can be played by literally every other race in the game. That being said, their lore reason for it is because they only were taught classes that Neltharion himself would have taught them, since Drakthir technically existed thousands of years ago before being put into stasis. So at the time, Neltharion wouldn't have met monks or wouldn't have been able to learn the way of a monk, so he wouldn't have been able to teach the Drakthir how to be a proper monk. And that type of lore tie-in could also be used for the player housing system and the Azeroth World 2.0 revamp. As these factions are focused on rebuilding themselves, they also get to build new homes to house all the new occupants. And with so many different new houses being now available, who's the better target to occupy those homes than the champion player that have been helping all of these factions move forward, fighting the battles within the dungeons and raids of various expansions, or fighting each other for the glory of the Alliance or Horde. And now those same champions, which have been previously kind of murder hobos going from one expansion into the next, slaying enemies and everything in sight for the best possible gear, but never really having a home to call their own, can now finally own a home within all of these factions that are looking to rebuild themselves back up to their original glory. But all of this is right now just a speculation based on some of the items, well actually a lot of different items that we've been able to data mine over the last few updates, and there's a pretty big extensive list of these items that have never actually been implemented anywhere in the game. And it looks like they're waiting to implement all of these items likely with the announcement of the Midnight expansion, which we'll know more of come summer of 2025, where they'll hopefully finally reveal some information regarding the next chapter of World of Warcraft. But for now, this is literally everything we know regarding the Midnight expansion so far. As always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video update. If you did enjoy this video or found it quite informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community for regular War Within and potentially, hopefully in the future, more Midnight updates, reveals, and even more data mining that I'll try to post in there a lot more regularly. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What other features would you like to see out of the next expansion of Midnight? And as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.